Honorable Deputy Chairman Rajya Sabha, Professor Kurian, Honorable members and friends. It sounds rather ponderous to ask me to deliver an address, and I have no such intention of doing it. This is an orientation session, and the purpose of the orientation exercise is to familiarize the honorable members, particularly those who are coming to the House for the first time, with how the House does function or should function. Because there are certain things which should happen, don't happen. Certain things which do not happen, do happen. So this is the whole purpose of the exercise, and the Honorable Deputy Chairman has already given you the crux of what the purpose is. I want to just share a few thoughts with you. A question is often asked by the public, sometimes by in different fora. Why is there a Rajya Sabha? This is not a new question. It has been asked for decades and centuries. When the American Constitution was being framed, the same question was asked. When our own Constitution was being framed, the same question was asked. And there is always need to have a reasonable answer, particularly from those of you, those who are members of Rajya Sabha, and people will ask you sooner or later, why are you necessary? Isn't one house parliament enough? So it is good to know why you are here. There are 2 or 3 very good reasons. There is that famous answer that was given by the American legislators of the first generation to cool the tea. The purpose of a second house, don't call it upper, don't call it lower. As far as I know and my reading of the Constitution of India goes, the 2 houses are equal. And if you read the text carefully, wherever the 2 houses are mentioned, the Council of States or Rajya Sabha is mentioned before the House of People or Lok Sabha. The intention was very clear. The functional modalities were different. So why do we need a second house? That is a question which we must be very clear about. And there are 2 or 3 very good reasons. One, of course, is that we are a union of states. We are not a federation. We don't call ourselves quasi-federation. We very deliberately called ourselves a union of states. A union which is indestructible. It is not like the Federation of Australia where 5 different states, independent states, agreed to come together. It is not like the American Federation also, where states which were separate agreed to come together. We were one state in the period of British rule in India. The process of making it into a more practical administrative and legislative arrangement was started by the Government of India Act 1935, which formed the basis on which the Constituent Assembly worked and produced this document. So it is a union of states. The purposes are specified, the intentions are specified. But because it is a union, the states have certain interests which are not necessarily always reflected in the other House of Parliament. In the other House, members are elected on the basis of constituencies. The representation in Rajya Sabha is on the basis of states. And therefore, it is expected, and it does happen on great many occasions, that individual states' interests are flagged in Rajya Sabha. And the best example I can give you is, all of you who were present there, was yesterday. Yesterday, the long discussion over what should be given, how it should be given to a new state which was formed as a result of a legislative exercise, was discussed at great length. And that is the reason why the interest of state comes in. And there are innumerable other occasions when interests of states are flagged by members, sometimes members coming from those states, at other times by anybody else. So that is one of the principal instruments through which Rajya Sabha makes itself very functional. But then there is another purpose. The purpose of the other house, or upper house to put it in quotes, is to check haste, to cool passions, and to control legislation. Now, all three are important. After all, when you are making a law, which means both houses thinking together, prepare a piece of legislation and adopt it and send it to Rashtrapati Ji for his signature so that it becomes the law of the land. But very often it happens that for this reason or that reason, sufficient attention is not given either to the purpose of legislation or to the wording of legislation. We have great many instances of both. Each one of you are familiar with it. And the whole purpose of the reform which was introduced way back in 1993, and Vajpayee ji was one of the initiators of that reform, of introducing the committee system, the standing committee system. We did have a consultative committee system for as long as the Parliament has been functioning, but that was more by way of an exchange of views. It was not a serious exercise, and still is not a serious exercise, working on the text of a document. So what was done in 1993 was a standing committee system was introduced in the Parliament of India, and a set of committees were formed for different subjects which may come up for legislation. And all of you, I presume, are already members of some committee or the other. If not, I think in the course of the month of August, that exercise will be completed by the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and the Secretariat. But when you go to a committee meeting, you notice a changed working style and a changed atmosphere. When I was new to Rajya Sabha, I raised a question innocently. I said, the committees do such good work, why is it not publicized? And what was at the back of my mind was that I had seen the committees in American Congress function, British Parliament function, Australian Parliament function. They are open committees. Media is invited, evidence is given openly and publicly. And I was advised by a wise old senior member, for God's sake, don't do it. So I said, why? And his answer was that in committees, we work as a committee, as a team, not on party lines. The moment you expose it to the media and the public, then everybody will take party position. And therefore the work of the committee will not get done. And I understood then, and subsequently over the past 9 years, I have understood the logic of it. Because the reports which are coming out of committees are substantive reports. There are two lacunae in the committees, as I see it. This is my private thought. I am not expressing it for any other purpose. Actually, I shared that first opinion with Vajpayee ji. I was those days ambassador to UN and he had come to New York. And the new committees had been formed. So one morning I said to him, "Sir, you have done a very good thing. But one thing got left out." And he turned and said, "Wo kya?" So I said, "Sir, you have exempted the ministers. You only get officials to come before the committee to give evidence or to throw light on subjects. But the officials are working under ministers and they will say only as much as is the policy of the minister." So his answer was delightful. I can share it with you. He said, "Wo aana nahi chahte." But I think in this house, right present here, are individuals who have volunteered to go before committees. And maybe sometimes in the future, we will reach that stage when committees will request ministers to attend and the committee can benefit from those views. But at the moment we have not reached that stage. But committees are useful, immensely useful, and I would request you to pay much greater attention to committees, because your real input will come in there. And there's one other purpose for committees. Legislation is drafted in a government department, whichever the department may be. It is drafted with the best of intentions. It is drafted by competent people. But the implications of legislation are not always evident. You need careful scrutiny. What is the meaning of a particular piece of legislation? What is the meaning of a word or expression? Ultimately, all of it is subject to judicial scrutiny. And therefore, it has been found, this has been the practice, not only in our parliament, all over, that it is in committee stage that words and expressions get amended, changed. The experience of individual members comes into play there. So for both these reasons, committee work is very important. Besides that, what the Honourable Deputy Chairman has already said, the purpose of being a member of a legislature, Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, State Assembly, any legislature, there are basically three purposes. One is legislation. The second is seeking accountability of the executive. And the third is debate on public issues. Now, sometimes the view is expressed that accountability of elected houses is at the time of elections. Correct. I cannot disagree with it. But that accountability is once in 5 years. The whole purpose of accountability in legislature is daily accountability. And therefore, as the Deputy Chairman rightly said, the two instruments which are used on an everyday basis is the 0 hour on something that might have happened which the member thinks is important enough to be mentioned, and the question hour. Why does a member raise a particular question? He must be having good reason for it. And the Honourable Minister has to answer that question seriously. He has to answer it seriously, and he has to be prepared for follow-up questions, so what are called supplementaries. And if you ask any minister of the government, present government or past governments, they will tell you that on the question day, they spend a lot of time briefing themselves, discussing with their advisors what possible questions could be asked as a follow-up question, so that they are not caught off guard. So accountability through daily scrutiny in the form of 0 hours, in the form of question hour, and in the form of debates on issues of public interest or public importance is a critical role that you as legislators do play. I don't have to say very much more. The Honorable Deputy Chairman has already told you about the importance of rules. These rules are a compendium of experience acquired over decades. They have been written carefully. From time to time, if the House has seen it necessary, they have also amended the rules. But by and large, the rules as they stand, if you use them carefully, intelligently, they will be of benefit to you. So please do study the rules, study the rulings. There is a compendium on this. There is a much bigger book, Rajya Sabha at Work, which I don't advise everybody to read all of it at one go, but at some time or the other, all of you should be familiar with it. I have one last point to make. Here again I share my personal thing, and I have shared it with successive Prime Ministers. The duration of the sittings of Parliament over the years has contracted. The Parliament of India used to sit for 110 days. There was sufficient time, both for discussion, debate, and for all other activities of the House. Now our average is something like 70 days, Professor, plus minus? 70 days. In other words, almost a little more than 1/4 of the time is now available, 1/3 sometimes. And therefore, there is a much greater requirement for time management. We have a great tradition in our country of classical music. And Indian classical music, whether it is the Hindustani music or the Carnatic music, begins with alap. Now alap is a great thing. In music it's a great thing. But in terms of Parliament time management, it is nothing short of disaster. The member has to ask his or her question. Now, if the member decides to make a speech before the question, the time for answering the question is abridged. We have in 0 hour a 3-minute rule, which the Honorable Deputy Chairman very strictly observes, that after 3 minutes your speech is not recorded. And over time it has been found that those 3 minutes are quite sufficient to say what you want to say. And if you see other parliaments in the world, the question hour is a rapid exchange. I'm not saying members are always responsible. Sometimes ministers are responsible. The temptation on the part of ministers is to read the whole agenda of the ministry into a question. That is not the purpose of the question. That should not be the purpose of your question also. So brevity and time management is critical. The same thing happens in debates. Whoever is in the chair, whether I am in the chair, the deputy chairman is on the chair, or any of the vice chairman is in the chair, he has before him or her a chart which gives party time, depending on the strength of the party in the House. Now, how is the chair to manage it if each speaker violates party time? It's a two-way responsibility. I'm not saying it is only the chair's responsibility. It is also the responsibility of the whips of parties. They should decide who are going to be the speakers. They do decide that. But then how much time should be given? If a party has 20 minutes, and if it puts forward 10 speakers, you get 2 minutes per person, which is unfair. If the leader of the party decides that she is going to take all the time of 15 minutes out of 20 minutes, then nobody else can speak really. So time management is critical, and please pay attention to it. And my last point, disruption. What shall I say? Disruption, there is a parliamentary practice of showing your disagreement. That is a walkout. If you don't agree with something that has been said, a group or an individual walks out. But that walkout is symbolic. You go out 5 minutes in the inner lobby and come back. But coming into the well is not parliamentary tactic. It is holding the House to ransom for the interest of an individual or a group. Supposing you have a disruption, let us say in 0 hour. All of you are witness to it. We decide every morning that 12 people will get a chance to speak in 0 hour. And if you have a disruption on the first speaker, the other 11 have lost their opportunity. If you have a disruption in the question hour, all those who want to ask questions, their opportunity is lost. So in effect it means that an individual member or a group of members are impinging on the privilege of the rest of the members of the House. I leave it to you to decide how fair that is. Besides the fact that it creates a bad impression in the public, and the public impression is that the MPs don't work, they only make noise. I don't think it is in our interest to do that. I think we can make our point very effectively by speaking in Parliament, holding the executive to account, scoring your point wherever you want to score it, and do it in a manner which is parliamentary, not unparliamentary. Because after all your rights, all your duties, all your privileges emanate from what is admissible in parliamentary terms. And if you yourself move out of that circle of what is parliamentary, then anybody in the general public is free to do the same. And that would not be a happy day. I wish you well. I hope you find this exercise useful. Thank you very much.